Great. All right, Glenn, thanks for the introduction. Jon Gray here, CEO of CatapultBI. So today I'm going to be talking about data governance and why you need to take an interest in it, what it is, and most importantly, how to get started on that journey. So Glenn's already given the introduction, so I'll skip into Catapult. So we're a data specialist brand within the Dialog group. We have a broad range of clients from different sectors, quite a strong representation in federal and state government. And in terms of our partner relationship, there's a number of international brand names that we partner with who have some best of breed software that we use in our professional services. So today I'm going to touch on a number of topics around data governance, but before we dive into data governance, I just want to take a little bit of time to address some of the problems of change and the future and innovation and why it doesn't always work out the way we think. Once I've done that, we'll dive into what is data governance. Then I'll mention this idea of a framework, how we design a framework, how we implement it, and then some of the enablers for good governance around stewardship, literacy, metadata, and a few little comments on how to get started on that journey. So first of all, innovation and the future and the problem with getting there. So when I was a small child, I used to look forward to the days in the future when we would have space travel and we'd colonize the solar system. Now, some years on, it hasn't happened. And why is that? Well, interestingly, the science and the engineering is ready to go, but it's not just the science and the engineering. To get there, you have to get the economic fundamentals right. So it's just not cost effective, okay? Now, here's an analogy in the data management and analytics space. Many people are looking forward to that day when we have our AI-powered, data analytics-inspired, self-optimizing business process improvement nirvana, where all these things just somehow magically improve and get better through the amazing software. Now, the problem with this journey is the science and the engineering, it's ready to go. It's been there for years, for decades. We don't need more science and engineering, but to make this happen, we need to get the data management fundamentals right. Data governance is one of those key data management fundamentals. If we get governance and the other data management fundamentals in place, then this journey to the future will happen. So data governance, yes, it's a data management practice, but what kind of practice is it? What are the key distinctive characteristics of governance? It's actually relatively straightforward. Data governance, it's rules for managing data properly, okay? Look, we all drive cars, we're familiar with the rules of the road. We drive on the left or the right, we give way here or there, go around roundabouts in a certain way. Now, we understand that in order to drive safely, there has to be rules and we have to follow them. Without those rules, chaos follows, okay? It's a bit like that in data management. In order to get good stuff done, there has to be some basic rules that we follow. And data governance is those basic rules about good data management. Now, if we don't follow those rules, all sorts of bad things can happen. Information gets leaked out, a data breach. This can be quite harmful from a reputational or even an economic perspective. There's all sorts of data privacy legislation that people have to comply with. And again, if you don't follow the rules, a breach of that legislation, the consequences can be quite severe. So that's to do with risk and avoiding bad things. Another good reason for following the rules is if we want to make improvements, if we want to make our data quality better, if we want to make our reporting better, improving customer experience, all of these outcomes, in order to make these kinds of improvements, we need to have these basic rules about good data management in place. So those are the two main reasons why we have it. Avoiding bad stuff, but also enabling good stuff to happen as well. Now, here's a couple of examples of where things can go seriously wrong. And these ultimately relate back to poor data governance. You might be familiar with the case of Combank. It got caught by Austrac laundering money for criminal syndicates. Now, Austrac, they took a hard line on this, and ultimately CommBank had to coffer a $700 million fine. Similarly, Westpac recently got caught again breaching anti-money laundering legislation. Both of these ultimately can be tracked back to poor data governance. Now, if you're a large bank like CommBank or Westpac, you could probably afford $1 billion fine, but not many organizations in Australia can. Most organizations would go out of business if they got a $1 billion fine. So get that data governance right. Bad governance can cause really, really bad things to happen to your business. Governance, strategy, they're similar, but they're subtly different. And it's important that you understand this distinction because you need both. Now, data governance, as I've explained, it's the rules for managing data properly. We can think of it as the highway code, the rules of the road. Now, that highway code doesn't tell you where to go, but if you're going somewhere, it tells you how to drive to that destination safely. That's what data governance is about. Data strategy, subtly different. Data strategy is about the destination. Where are you actually going to go? And from a data perspective, a technical perspective, what we're doing in data strategy is we're aligning our data management capability and capacity with our business strategy. It's where are we going to go on this data journey? Governance is the rules of the road to make sure we get there safely. Where do you go for help with all of this? Well, data management has been in existence for some decades, and there are lots of organizations, professional societies that have some very, very good advice about data governance. We in Catapult are advocates of DARMA. It's an international society for data management professionals, and they have a really good book called the DMBOK, which describes all the basic stuff you need to know to do good data management. And they have this little representation here on the screen, which we call the wheel. And in that wheel, it identifies the top 11 facets of data management that you need to address to do things well. And of course, sitting there in the bullseye in the middle is data governance. So how do you go about implementing it? Now, here's the good bit about data governance. For most organizations, the principles of good governance, it's pretty much the same from one organization to another. Whether you're a bank, a government agency, a retailer, a mining company, the way that you do data governance is broadly the same from one organization to another. However, every single enterprise will have aspects of their business that are specific to that enterprise and subtly different. So Catapult, what we use is what we call a templated approach to create a tailored data governance framework, the rule book for that organization. And along with the rule book are some guidelines in terms of how those rules get implemented and checked and monitored and followed. Okay. Now, DARMA, DMBOK, as I just mentioned, is a good starting point. But in addition to that good starting point, we need some additional ingredients. And let's go through and see what they are. So this diagram here shows at the top, there's our guidance, DARMA, DMBOK. Now that's got probably for most organizations somewhere between 60% of what you need to create your own data governance framework. Now that framework, it's going to be your rule book, as it were. It tells you how your organization should be doing data governance. Now, to fill in the missing gaps, that sort of 20 to 40% that's not in DARMA, because it's quite specific to your organization, this is where you need to look at the business drivers in your organization. What are the specific kinds of risk that you need to manage in your organization? In terms of your improvement activities, what kind of things do you need to improve and why? Do you need to get on top of document management, records management? Do you need to do modeling better? What kind of things are driving your improvements in your organization? What kind of risks specific to your organization are driving your data governance? So we've got the MBOT guiding, and we've got these business drivers shaping it. We put these together, and that gives you your rule book. Now, the rule book on its own is good. You can tell people that you have one, and you can tell your employees and your auditors and assessors, regulators, whoever needs to know, you can tell them, oh, we've got a data governance framework, we've got the rule book. But what we have to do now is we have to implement that rule book. We need to make sure that the rules are being followed. So we need to have specific changes, adjustments to the way that your businesses work, often very small changes, to make sure that these rules are being followed and we can track that those rules have been followed. So this takes us on to the next step, the implementation. And in order to do that, we need to take a current state assessment. So our consultants will go in, we'll look at how your business works, we'll look at your current data management needs and practices. That will then give us an implementation guide, which will then support the implementation of that rule book so that data governance, the rules in your rule book, get implemented in your business processes. Once those data governance rules have been implemented, then you can see all those good outcomes: better data quality, better reporting, efficient and effective compliance. All the things that you want from good governance will come, but you've got to implement them. You've got to implement that rule book. Now, what sort of things will we see in this rule book? So at the very highest level, what we want to be able to see is an org chart, and in that org chart is somebody who is responsible for data governance. Now, ideally, that should be someone called a chief data officer or someone with a similar title. And that responsibility ideally needs to sit at the executive level. So up there with your COOs and your CFOs and CIOs, ideally you need to have someone at that executive level who is responsible and will drive and be accountable for governance in your organization. Ideally, that person should also be on the business side of the house. Yes, they could be on the corporate side, maybe in IT, but that's not always the best place for data governance. We advise that your CDO is on the business side, being a champion of good data management and good data governance in the business. Also, you need to have, sitting below that org chart, you need to have a RASCI or RACI chart, which clearly articulates who's accountable, responsible, consulted and informed around those different data governance functions. So who's doing the strategy, who's resourcing data governance, who's managing the literacy, who's making sure stewardship happens. All of those functions, they need to be mapped against the senior people in the organization, so it's clear, unambiguous, exactly what needs to be done, and importantly, who is going to do it. Okay, that's right at the beginning of your rule book. Let's move on. So, okay, so we've got our rule book, we've got a high-level structure in terms of responsibilities, accountabilities, and so on. What's going to be the main implementation vehicle for getting governance happening in our ordinary day-to-day business processes? So key to this process are what we call data stewards. So data stewards, they're champions of good data management, they're champions. Hello, John? So data stewards, these are the people in the business, they know the business processes, they're familiar with their data. So they typically live in a particular business division, in sales, in shipping, in finance, but they're also data practitioners who know data as well. And these are going to be the main champions of good data management and good data governance in your organization. These are the people that tell the rest of the organization what the right thing to do is, and to check and make sure that the right thing is happening. Another important enabler for data governance is data literacy and cultural change. Data is the language of business. If you don't speak fluent data, you can't govern your business. And literacy has got to be enterprise-wide. Managers, executives, shop floor, everybody needs to have some level of data literacy. Now, data literacy, it's not only the technical knowledge about data management, about databases and files and records and so on, but it also addresses the culture and mindset. What does it mean to be a data-driven organization? Why does everybody need to know and appreciate the role that data plays? That's an important part of the literacy. Good thing is there's lots of material on data literacy available. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and it's not a huge job to create something that's just specific and serves your organization well, something that we do quite a lot of with our clients. This one here is a graphic that we call the governance tree. The reason why we introduce this is there's another data management practice which is very relevant to data governance, and that's called metadata management. Metadata is essentially data about data. It's a high-level distillation about what exists in your organization, what data, where does it live, where did it come from, who created it, who can access it, and so on. And this metadata should live in something called an enterprise information catalog. It's the source of truth about data and data management practice in your organization. Once you have that, then you can build very, very solid data governance. Why is it important? Well, if you don't get that metadata management under control, if you don't build up that enterprise data catalog, data governance will be fragmented. It's one of the root causes of poor data governance implementation is without good metadata management as well, it's often very, very hard to implement well. Now, data governance, if you're going to deploy it as your deployment plan has suggested, we recommend that you do it incrementally. So there's two main approaches. You can either go big bang and suddenly everybody in the organization from now on needs to be doing data governance, or you can roll it out division by division. We actually think that that incremental division by division rollout is best, and that's what we recommend to most of our clients. It's easier if you start off with a particular subset of your assets, your data assets, perhaps the most critical customer information or whatever is most important to your business. Let's get the governance in there first, and then we'll move out to the rest of the organization and we'll get to the other data assets in the fullness of time. In our opinion, that incremental deployment is usually the best for most large organizations. In terms of rolling out data governance, what do people see when governance is occurring? Usually not a lot of change, okay? If that deployment is done well, often what happens is rather small changes in the business as usual processes and procedures. Often it means work instructions just get a slight amendment. So instead of pressing some buttons and typing something in, you do something just subtly different, okay? And that's good because we don't want to scare people by data governance. We don't want to make it a huge, big, humongous change in their work practice. Good deployment, good implementation of data governance, it's often very, very small changes, but those small changes are important. And over time, as people do the right thing, then we get all those good outcomes in terms of better risk management and better reporting and improvement and so on. A metaphor that we use here in terms of this gradual incremental change is what we call the silver thread. Over on the left, you can see the Golden Gate Bridge, very, very strong. It's held up by two massive cables. Now those cables, very strong, but they're actually made up of 20,000 thin little wires that run length to length across the bridge. Now, to build up that strong cable, you had to start somewhere, that first wire, and then backwards and forwards and so on. We call that first wire the silver thread. And how does that work in organizations when we're deploying data governance? So here's a little graphic that shows how it works. So over on your left, you can see the executive. There's a pain point. Governance is not working. Oh, these reports are all wrong, okay? So we're going to do things better, but we're going to do it using this silver thread approach. We're going to use our stewards and our data analysts to identify the problem. It's a faulty work instruction, not a big change. We identify the change, we deploy the new work instruction, people use that work instruction in their BAU, and look at that. What pops out is a much better report, okay? So that journey backwards and forth is what we call the silver thread. And then we find another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. And eventually we implement good governance across all the processes of our organization. Nobody heard the big bang. There was no big scary change, but gradually over a few weeks or months, it gets deployed, and there you are, the organization works much better. So look, that in a nutshell gives you an overview of data governance. It describes what we think is a good approach to it. And at this point now, I'd like to hand you back to Glenn. Okay, Glenn?
All right. Thanks, John. What we'll do now is we'll ask any of the viewers if they've got any questions, and we'll tackle it from there. Thanks very much.
Good.